Hey guys, this is Dr. Waluigi, and before we begin the video, I wanted to give a special announcement. Because I've reached over 50 subscribers, I have now decided to open a Twitter account. In this account, you can follow what I'm doing, ask me some questions, and I will be showing off some of my collection that I've gained over the few years. I'll leave a link in the description below, and without further ado, let's begin the episode on Masters of the Universe Revelation. Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C-Dot that knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. Well, the time has come. It's time to talk about the show that makes everyone cringe in fear, vomit in disgust, and is just downright unpleasant to think about. However, I will say that despite its flaws, I kinda like this show. Yeah, I'm expecting a lot of you to leave after this, but for those of you who are still here, this is my review of Masters of the Universe Revelation. The series began development in 2019 after it was announced by Netflix that they were planning on creating two new series for He-Man, the CGI show that was intended for newer fans, and today's series which was made for older fans. The show was officially announced by the showrunner Kevin Smith, stating that it would be a direct sequel to the original series that would tie up loose ends that were not explored in the original series. We slowly ended up getting more and more information from Kevin Smith's YouTube channel, as well as some information he released through his Twitter account. Unfortunately, this is where things get, for lack of a better term, messy. A lot of the information that was released didn't go over well with many fans, and when the first part of the show did come out, it received a lot of hate from the old school fans. If you guys want to know the scale of people's reaction to this show, it went from genuine hate to people posting many hate-filled reviews and reactions saying that Kevin Smith made a shit smear on the face of the franchise. However, I tend to disagree with the older fans, as I did personally get a lot of enjoyment out of it, to the point that I am excited to see the second series, Revolution, when it eventually drops. Though I will admit my guard is up if that series becomes the same as this one. The show takes place a few years after the original series ended, picking up with Man-at-Arms stepping down from his role and letting Teela take up the mantle. Unfortunately, Skeletor has been able to enter Grayskull, and with the help of his henchmen, has plans to take the power for himself. Until He-Man and the other Masters rush to the aid of the Sorceress, in which we get one of the most shocking things to happen to these characters. For good or bad. I'll start off by saying this. I love the cast they got for this series. Since everyone in the cast, I will assume, is friends with Kevin Smith, it's no surprise that he was able to get actors like Mark Hamill, Sarah Michelle Gellar, and so many other famous 80s, 90s, and 2000s actors that gave us amazing performances. I just wish that the writing complemented these actors. If you can't tell by now, the biggest complaint from many fans, including myself, was the treatment that Kevin Smith and his writing team gave to these characters. From killing off many of the characters in both parts, including fan favorites, to the complete and utter backhanded way they made Teela out to be this incredibly whiny and hate-filled bitch that it's a miracle this show was able to get a part 2. Sure, I hate Teela from the original series, but that was because she was written as this great strong female character that ended up getting treated more like a character that needed to be saved constantly. I don't blame Sarah Michelle Gellar for this, as this character is just poorly written and makes you want to pull your hair out for how unbelievably shallow and bitter she is in part 1. To quote the late Kevin Conroy in Justice League, and yes, I know he plays Merman in this show, which is awesome, cry me a river and get over it. So before I talk about the many complaints that fans have made about this show, I want to mention a few positive things about this series. First off, the animation is spectacular and complements the downright accurate designs of the characters and Eternia, while also improving upon certain characters that did need a redesign. This show was animated by Powerhouse Animation Studios, which have done many other great shows for Netflix like Castlevania and Blood of Zeus. They did a fantastic job on making not just the characters look accurate, but the world of Eternia, along with the new locations and characters that only appeared from the toy line. I especially love the stuff dealing with Subternia where we meet Scareglow, voiced by the Candyman himself, Tony Todd. He's such a creepy and disturbing character that comes off like the devil of Eternia, and I enjoyed every single bit of him on screen in Part 1, and his brief fight scenes in Part 2. Which does bring up the fact that despite my complaints in the last section, some of the characters are given much more interesting and fleshed out backstories. Watching Evelyn and Orko were the highlights of Part 1 for me, as we got to learn and see more of Orko as he went from being the comic relief character to having been set up by his parents to be this great and powerful sorcerer, but eventually disappointing his family and being mocked by his friends. And even though they did kill him off in Part 1, Orko got a glow up in Part 2 and had a great fight scene with Evelyn after she gains the power of Grayskull. Speaking of which, Part 2 is definitely where this show shines. Say what you will about Part 1, but it got saved by Part 2, with the stakes getting bigger and the comedy got funnier. One of my favorite scenes from this part is the interaction between Adam and Skeletor just before they go to fight Evelyn. It's so funny. We also get a better dive into Evelyn before she met Skeletor and exploring why she still stayed with him despite going on her own a lot of the time. Even Teela gets a somewhat character redemption in Part 2 for her dropping the massive whiny attitude she had in Part 1. I do wish that we got to see more of these character moments throughout the show, as I feel like you can do a lot with them after having read many comic books based off He-Man. Sadly, this was not meant to be. So despite all the positives I do give this show, there are several glaring flaws that make this show less than perfect. First up are a lot of the pointless deaths of certain characters. Many of the characters from He-Man are just killed off in very unexpected and just downright disrespectful ways. There are some characters like Roboto and Orko that I do think are handled well enough, but then you get to the three that many fans have commented on that were just plain idiotic. The minor one was of course my favorite master, Mossman. He was one of the characters I was looking forward to seeing the most, as he was one of the more powerful masters who could take on most of Skeletor's forces. They even got Alan Oppenheimer to come and voice him. Unfortunately, he dies after Skeletor sets him on fire, and then dies again after Evelyn destroys Preternia. It felt like Kevin Smith was trolling us by having one of the few remaining actors from the original series voice a character he didn't care enough about and killing him to intentionally piss every He-Man fan off. The other two big discs that also piss everyone off are that of He-Man and Skeletor. In the first episode, Kevin Smith decided to kill off the main characters of the show just so that he could then focus on Teela and her journey into becoming the new sorceress of Grayskull. Now, to be fair here, Kevin Smith did say that he was planning on making Teela the focus of the show and having her origins and destiny revealed in this show, and it was always planned for her to become the new sorceress, as the original series had an episode where Teela goes on a journey to learn about her past. The problem that I have with this is that they decided to kill off He-Man just so that the writers could have an excuse to focus on Teela. It felt like they just did this because Kevin Smith and his writing team didn't know what He-Man's role would be in the show, so they just decided to kill him off right away and give Teela a new sidekick that does nothing. Yeah, sorry to anyone who likes What's-Her-Face here, but let's be honest, the only reason they made this character was more than likely just to make her the new Man-at-Arms, when any other character could have been given that honor, male or female. Which leads into the main reason why people hate this show. Teela is a horribly written character. At first I didn't mind Teela too much for getting mad at everyone for keeping Adam's secret as He-Man, as it made sense that she would be in a state of shock and anger after seeing Adam die. But over the course of Part 1, she becomes this whiny, vindictive brat that hates everyone and everything about Eternia, to the point that she is willing to let magic die because of her bitterness and anger. She even berates Adam for making a noble sacrifice to save his people, and she has the ovaries to tell him that they had to live with it. She felt like a completely different character from the original series, that she's almost unrecognizable as Teela. I want to make it clear again that I don't blame Sarah Michelle Gellar for this performance, but I will blame the writing team that, let's face it, didn't care enough about the show to give us something that would please both old and new fans. I feel like there are too many good things in this show that make it from being the worst of the He-Man franchise. It has spectacular animation, the cast is amazing, and brings a new sense of life, and it keeps up with the world building by introducing us to the equivalent of Eternia's Heaven and Hell. If it weren't for the near terrible writing in Part 1, I would have put this show much lower on the spectrum. But because of Part 2, I do think that there is more that this series does well, as opposed to something like The New Adventures of He-Man, where it was just made to sell toys and felt like it was a Flash Gordon ripoff. For that reason, I'm giving Masters of the Universe Revelation a 6 out of 10. It may not be the worst of the He-Man franchise, but it's still not the best. Also, Kevin Smith, if you're watching this, please don't botch up Revolution. You've already goofed once. We can't take another goof by you not giving a shit. Well, thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night, everyone.